Shall I just kick off? Good morning. Has everyone been decently caffeinated in the break? Are we good? Full focus? Back at it? Excellent. I have the wonderful pleasure of being here the first time. So far it's been great. And I get to talk to you about a project that I really, really love working on. I get to talk to you about Pickle. First, I'll introduce myself. As if the corduroy didn't already scream as much, I identify as a recovering academic. So this, there you go. So this feels quite nostalgic. Could you all be slightly distracted and on your phones? Then it's fully back there. I used to work on real-time embedded systems, but I've always had a language perspective on things because it's very hard to get electrical engineers to tell you what their system really does. So you have to really make them say it out loud, and a programming language is a wonderful mechanism for that. But then later when I was cured, or at least when therapy started, I went into industry. I worked on child safety and on the programming language Hack. Who here knows Hack? A few hands at Facebook. Worked on a domain-specific language for mechanical engineers at a startup. And for the last 5 years I've been at Apple, and I've worked on this thing called Pickle that I'm going to tell you about. And if I'm not working, I love walking up and down hills. I love holding one of these in a slightly different setting when I sing. And if I'm not doing any of those things, I'll mostly be having a whiskey somewhere. So, what is Pickle? Pickle is a configuration language. Who here works with configuration? Who here never raises their hand? Excellent, good. So we open sourced this days before last year's ConfigManagement Camp. I wasn't here because I was working very hard to actually get it open sourced, but luckily James was here, and he was gracious enough to, even though we entirely mobbed him with the release, to ad hoc do a talk, which was great. Thank you very much for that, James. Now, and it's not a popularity contest per se, but it does feel nice to get some confirmation that what you're working on is considered relevant. That's cheeky, and I'm dreadfully sorry. It's the only one, I promise. But it does say something about there is a need. There is a problem that people understand exists. So, and I think Heather in her talk yesterday captured that very well with her definitions of what configuration was. It was typo-driven development. Who here has ever taken a service down by a typo? Right? Who here still deploys on Friday afternoon? Excellent. Alternatively, software that doesn't have a debugger. Yeah, great. So that is a thing about config, right? So config does tend to be that space where tooling doesn't live. And it's by far the most dangerous part of the stack, because most outages by a country mile happen through config mistakes. So we want to move those errors to the left. We want to catch it before deployment. That's the hard target. Softer target is move it further left as you type. You don't even want to make errors. It just needs to be there. Autocomplete prevents typos. Squiggly lines prevents typos. It's great. So, and we want to say less, or to not repeat ourselves. We want to be dry. And it's good to think for a second about use cases for this language We have a use case that is to do application configuration where you use Pickle as a library and you consume Pickle directly. Has all kinds of benefits in that you publish a very well documented, very well typed configuration schema, and people cannot hold your application wrong, which is great. But alas, I think I'm guesstimating here, just who here works on the application side and who works on the infrastructure side? Applications? Okay, infrastructure? That's good news, because I'm targeting this talk very much to that. The world has systems in it, and they don't speak Pickle. So we generate a whole bunch of configuration files, JSON, YAML, TOML, XML. This I'm just doing to bug the transcript, because... And I had a feeling that it would feel weird to only hear my half of this conversation. So, if you want stuff to be dry, you can't use your JSON or your YAML or your... because those things are repetitive. You have to be fully explicit. And so, there's a school of thought, there's a question I often get when people first hear that I'm working on a configuration language. They go, it's not Turing complete, is it? Because then I will not use it. Who here knows about Pac-Man completeness? Pac-Man completeness. So, Turing completeness doesn't take much. Like, if you have any sort of evaluation model and you didn't make a point of pruning your language by, for example, saying you must bound the recursion or something. A lot of languages are Turing complete. Pac-Man complete, I have this from Edwin Brady, but I found out it wasn't his. He got it from Parola, so this is received wisdom. Pac-Man complete means, would you want to implement the game of Pac-Man in it? And I think the purpose of this configuration language as a separate thing, because you could use TypeScript, we heard in the previous talk as well. Why would you not do that? It's because you want to have a language that naturally expresses the minimum stuff that you want to do. Basically, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. And you want to make it unlikely, you want to make it natural to avoid that. So that's why we do a separate language that is very minimalist. And very important part of that is, since SREs are a very important user group for our language, when do they need it most? They need it when they get paged at 2 a.m. And when you get paged at 2 a.m., you have the reading level of a 12-year-old. I'm not judging. As a matter of fact, having emigrated last week and having been to FOSDEM and being here this week, insomnia hit me hard last night, so I currently have the reading level of a 12-year-old. I'll be doing some live coding. The proof of the pudding is definitely in the eating. So, let's look at some actual config for a sec. Who can spot the bug? Norway. Does everyone, who does not know what Norway means? Right, so we all know how problematic that is. It's not the only bug.
Depends on the YAML version. No, the region.
The region, right, there's a typo in the region. There's one that's incredibly cheaty, and there's between the hyphen and the property name URL, there's a tab. I mean, you gotta make a point. And here's the other thing. In this config, interval meant milliseconds. So our health check is hammering our system to death. But nobody told us, because we thought it was minutes. Okay. Yeah, you couldn't know that. That was cheating on my part. I'm sorry. So typically, we consider infrastructure as code to mean a bunch of config files checked into a repository. And it usually starts out looking something like this. We've YAMLed it. All hard-coded. And that works for simple deployments. That's actually quite nice for simple deployments because everything is concrete. You don't have to interpret anything. Everything is there. If you've got 2 machines, do this. If you've got 10,000 machines, be patient. So, because we always think, oh, but you know, I just need this little bit of flexibility. I just need to like punch a little hole here, because I just need, in this case, I just need the region to vary, and I need the corresponding HTTP proxy to vary, right? So let's just do something with templating, because that's probably good. And this is an entirely made-up templating language, which I like, because in real life, you often land in a file where you think, what is this? And all the people that came with the startup acquisition that led to the use of that language already left the company, because everything vested. So you get ad hoc-y sort of filling in of data. We typically add dynamic injection stuff. So we do cluster definitions in a file so that we can reuse them. That's great. And what else do we have? We have a production environment settings in a file. And then we can read some of that information to define the region. And depending on the cluster environment, we can then do some resource management. Great. And then you get cryptic APL-like lines with for loops. Concretely, this was made up. This was a real case. And I've removed the interspersing YAML, because it was like the previous slide, let's go back to that for a second, where there's code between the 2 angle brackets hiding inside the YAML, which for YAML is just a string, doesn't really care. But we have some interpreter doing that. This is Ginger. This was real code. I've obfuscated some names, but this was real code. And I've issues with this. For one, there's like a set and an append. So that means that this code is really imperative, and it means you have to read the entire file to understand what is going on. Also, in this case, what is my data if the environment is not one of these 2? Or if someone made a typo, right? So you even have undefinedness. The problem here is that a lot of meaning is hidden in syntax. And when you do that, and I'm going to show you a very childish example of how that really goes wrong, but I promise you, and I hope, I believe people will recognize it, it's real. In some file, you set a variable to a string. And then in a template, you interpolate it. And that's fine. Until someone in that file does something incredibly dangerous. And now suddenly you've changed the structure just because you've dumped raw characters into a file. Because I just want to punch a small hole, see? So, for people who enjoy classic XKCDs, this is good old Bobby drop tables. So, these are the things that we want to prevent. We want to make it safe. We want to make it ergonomic. That is what we'll be doing here. And now we're going to find out whether our language is safe and ergonomic enough to deal with someone who is very heavily sleep deprived. Live coding, what could possibly go wrong? Which means microphone switch? Yes. So let's try this. I believe I should mirror my display. I get a sense that on a different display, in the back,
Maybe a little bit bigger for the video.
a little bit bigger for the video stream. Excellent. So, the language. Look, ultimately config should be simple, right? So we just have name properties and string values, booleans. Now I'm going to look down this row and is this correct? Numbers, fair enough. So we have some straightforward things. No magic happens here, right? We all understand what this does? We're good? No one's confused? Excellent. We have structural things. I don't know why I Pascal cased everything and then suddenly OCaml cased, but sometimes that happens. So we have hierarchical objects that again contain values, nested values, arbitrary object structures. Great, no one is surprised. Everybody still recognizes that this is roughly the same as what you were doing with YAML and JSON and whatnot. Great. And then, no. And of course that doesn't. This is not readable, is it? Yeah, you would expect. There you go. It's equals, not plus. Good. I'm gonna so enjoy watching this video stream afterwards. Okay, and now I've evaluated and nothing happens. Yay! Starting to be marginally more useful. Marginally more useful. Marginally less useful. Right. So now we have basics, right? We can dump formats, which is nice, which is convenient. Yeah. So let's do something else. This was the machine model from the previous slide, from the slides, I should say. So here we have those definitions. Let's see how we could do this in Pickle. Oh. That's the one I wanted. Good. I'm going to define here a schema, which is to say I'm going to give types to things. As you can see on the left-hand side, we have a machines. That is a list of things. We call that a listing of machine. And now, immediately, my IDE already tells me that it doesn't know what a machine is. Right. Unsurprising, we have something called a class. You may have a guess at what language we targeted first. And here we can say things like, region is a string. That's already useful, because at least, you know, you can prevent numbers and booleans. Norway problems don't happen anymore, which is great. But we can do better, and we'll see how this works. So memory, we could also model as a string. But as you can see, it's in GB bytes. And I always mix them up, because I used to work in embedded systems, so everything was base 10. Gibby bytes being base 2, we have a type for that. It's called data size. We'll get back to how we use that. And then we have health checks. It's again a listing of health check. Health check, not a known type, right? Same thing. And so we define a health check. As a port, which is an int type, which is a string, and an interval, which is a, here's that other thing. Remember the interval in my YAML bug? Never again. So we have types for that. Let's look at how we use them.
Question. Can
Shoot.
you limit the port?
Sorry?
Limit the port.
Ah, love it. Okay, I'll jump ahead because that's apparently already an obviously good purpose. Yes, we can. There's a simple limit, which is at least no negative numbers because, you know, that's already annoying. In the case of a port, we have default definitions for your common sort of ranges. But really what this is a straightforward int with a constraint. So far I've just written simple first order types. But now with these parentheses, what I'm doing is saying it's an int that is subject to these constraints. Now let's also say that we're just going to reserve some ports and say that you're not allowed to stick it under 100, because why not? So yes, you can limit the port. And now let's see how that works.
Can you do it for the type as well? Yeah. Can you use dictionaries for the type? That you
Can you use dictionaries for the type? Yes, you can. Let me first start using it, and I'll come back to that. I'm really, it's nice to know that my planned talk is exactly meeting the needs of my audience, in order, by the way. Well done. I didn't put plants in this room. So while we're looking at this schema here at the bottom right, at the top right, we see a file that says amends, and then the name of the schema file. Amends in Pickle means this thing is like that thing, except these things. We good? So it really means you're not allowed to randomly add stuff. Pickle now tells me that's an unresolved property, don't do this. So this is your property name typo protection. Incredibly valuable. But amends also informs my autocomplete, because my IDE just reads the schema and goes, great, these are the names that are available to you. So I can add a few machines. First machine, US West, it's got memory. Tried to use a string, Pickle told me, no, that wasn't allowed. Isn't that delightful? I'll do that again. I so want to go back to base 10. Oh. And we define some health checks. That port, right? Can I limit the port? What am I doing? Oh. Defining a list of health checks. It's small, but there's a squiggle. And it tells me in my editor while I type that that port is not valid. The amount of time that sort of thing saves, I can only half suggest to you. So let's say we run this on the proper port. And we have a type. I'm doing this to make your point for you. I made a typo. It's perfectly acceptable. Pickle says this is okay, because this is a string. Right. I'm first going to finish this, and then we'll get back to that. Nope. I now know it's minutes, because I told it to. Going to leave the other machine for now. So with this, I can now evaluate my my schema, my module, sorry, and see that it generates. Great. And again, shan't be doing this all the time. Oh, fun fact. With Pickle, we never make arbitrary choices. So if a target format, in this case YAML, does not have a recognized standard representation for a thing like a data size in this case, we will not render it by default. But I'm going to put a pin in this because first I want to fix that TCB that should have shouted at me. I promise I'll get back to this. So let's go to that type. Who here writes some TypeScript? Who here has sometimes written TypeScript and then decided never to touch it again? Okay. My point being, do you know what string literal types are? So in Pickle, a concrete string value can also be used as a type. The only value that that type can assume is that value. So, for example, TCP. That's not very useful, because now that can only take one type. Luckily, we also have union types. So now I say it's either TCP or HTTP or HTTPS, and I'm just going to sidestep how those are different layers. But the point is, did you see that suddenly a squiggle appeared in my actual file? So it's now telling me that's not allowed. Not just that, had I done this before and had I started typing, it would have auto-completed for me as well. I think that's quite comfy. So now I can correct this to TCP, and that works. Right. Can we do more? Can we do better? Yes. I'm going to do the second machine. I hope. And I'm going to do that by copying the first machine. Yes, I'll get back to that, how that is a very bad idea. Because I promised you that you wouldn't have to. Now we have two machines. Let's just double check that. Yay, we have two machines. And now we put in that environment that I didn't put in before. So, this environment is a, did I define this? Hang on. I did not. An environment is just a mapping of string to string. And now in this environment, minus that typo, I can put in the HTTP proxy. And let me just copy that. So far, so boring, right? Not very exciting. And now we can do slightly more interesting stuff. So for example, we can do string interpolation. Because if you're going to stick the region in there, you might as well generally stick the region in there. And here you see Pickle resolving that from the object it is in. So if I give both a HTTP proxy environment variable and I evaluate this, then you see that the top one has a proxy.us west, and the bottom one has a proxy.us east. Again, so far so boring. Boring is good, remember. Boring means you get to go home after work. It is still repetitive, and I promised you that we'd clean that up. So, what we can do in Pickle is, I already showed you amends of a module, being a file, but we can also do object amends. So, I can take one of these, and define a local variable that I'll call proto machine because it's the prototype for a machine. Why not? And put in all these things, but not put in the region. Great. This local I can now use. And now what I do, I just use it twice. I amend the object. Remember, amending in Pickle means this thing is like that thing, except for this. We have these parentheses. If you want to have an endless discussion about syntax and parsing, later tonight. But this means I'm going to take what proto machine is, and I'm going to change the following. And what I'm going to change is, I sense stuff is still happening. Right? So now we have US West, we have US East. These are both of our machines. And I made a mistake. What I did was, I didn't tell Pickle that this was supposed to be a machine. And of course you make that mistake twice. This is a bit patchy. Doing the same thing here. Alternatively, we can use outer, by the way. But for now, I'll use this. It's a pattern that I enjoy. So now what I've done is I've said that this proto-machine object is an object. It has these properties, but it doesn't have a region. And that's why Pickle complained to me just now that there wasn't a region, because I am indeed very heavily sleep deprived, and it's very hard to run a script. But at least, you know, it shows me that I was holding it wrong, and then now it tells me, now it still resolves to two machines with, he said before evaluating it, with the correct proxy settings. That is now fully resolved. Who noticed that I can interpolate region without there being a region? Do we know what laziness is? Excellent, then I don't need to explain this. So in Pickle, basically, it always says, when you produce output for this, not before, but when you do, figure out what region is. And therefore, when I just put in a proto machine here, without a region, let me do that again, Pickle will complain and will tell me there is no region. Great. Are we confident that this checks things that we want checked? Are we all still awake? Right. Now let me grab the template that I prepared and show you how you normally would design this. Honestly, I'm going to enjoy this feed. Let me show you a little bit how we would design a thing like this. There we go. So Regions, I just made it a string. That was of course wrong, because in the introduction I showed you that you can make a typo in your region, which is really annoying. So again, you can use this enumeration concept here. Alternatively, you could use constraints and say that it matches a regular expression such that, you know, because whatever problem you have, regex will make it better. Although, to be fair, for Kubernetes names and those kinds of checks, regex do make it better. And what you see here is documentation that renders to a document page, which I'll show you a little bit later. It also renders when you look up properties in the IDE. Let me look at that for a minute. How am I doing for time? We're doing all right. So, where do I get those CPUs?
The upper bound part of that CPU. I'm curious, I would like to have some also.
Ah. Wait. It will happen. Doesn't I've seen server-side CPUs with crazier numbers than this, I think. Also, a machine, of course, could be a giant array of Raspberry Pis. Anyway, quick other thing that I want to show you, because I already showed you sort of a sense of reusability, right? I've showed you amends. You can also import, so that you can sideload stuff, which is great. But we also have a registry. You can publish your package wherever you like. You can, much like Go's proxy index, fetch it through our proxy index, which I'll show you later on a slide. But you can publish your packages wherever you like, and you get a URL like this. Now, the package pickle lang org is our proxy. And here what I do is in this project, I import Prometheus and Kubernetes. The Kubernetes templates we've just generated from the OpenAPI spec. The Prometheus, I believe, is crafted or generated from a JSON schema. I'm not entirely sure anymore. But the point being, we maintain a few of these, and it's open source. People submit packages to our place, which we call the pantry, because if you name a language pickle, you have to be punny. But yeah, so these are curated packages. You can publish them wherever and still consume them this way. Now what I've done here in a project file, which also amends something from our standard library, namely a project template. And here we define dependencies that we can then use in modules in our project. Oh. Like this one. Now I can import with a truncated URL. Normally this would be a package : / or a HTTPS or a file or whatever. But now I can refer to those dependencies with this @ syntax. And I can then define a template that I can fill out. By the way, I've used the word template and schema and module. None of these things have significantly different meanings. They all just mean file. And we say schema or template if it contains types. And typically, if it contains things that do not have values, like in this case Prometheus. It just says Prometheus must be an instance of Prometheus. Who knows, right? So this we call a schema because it is incomplete. So when Pickle screams at you saying, hey, you were supposed to give me a region and you didn't, that's because you're operating on a schema. If you amend a schema, you can then add that information, add that value. So let's try and do that. Is that me or is that someone else? I think I'm still good. Oh, I worked ahead, which is a little bit hideous. But here I do that amends of Prometheus deployment, and now I get my autocomplete, so I can say Prometheus, I get my autocomplete, scrape configs, I can hover over it and it will tell me what the type is. It's a listing of scrape config, so I can just add a new scrape config. Let's make it a Kubernetes SD config. Again, it tells me what the type is. I can also click through. So this is a package that the IDE has downloaded, so we've cached this locally for you so that you can just see the documentation, see the types, click around as if it's your own code. This is an incredibly more useful workflow than having to rely on a website with documentation. Just the context switch of the command tab, control tab, whatever window manager you use, is that much more ergonomic. And here we can add a new Kubernetes config. Let's see, namespaces, sure, why not? Oh, got so close. So this editing accelerates life. If you have to do this in YAML, you're very depressed by the end of it. Also, we've now ad hoc defined what we call a Prometheus deployment. Because, you know, we're not solving the problem for the world. That's what we have the Prometheus package for. But this is how we hold it. And I just want to say those few things. And then everything else should follow. So there's a whole bunch of definitions there for a config map where the Prometheus.conf file is populated with the right thing. Here, what we do here is we say, take that Prometheus property that at some point a user will fill in for me. But when it is filled in, it has an output that is renderable as text. That's the thing I want. I don't have to think about how many layers of escaping I need. Again, that's a... It's good when problems land. And then there's this one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and then I'll finish up, which I should have done in the previous segment. But again, sleep deprivation is real. So we're going back to our machines. And we had this. Pickle could evaluate it. But really, someone should have kept me honest on this, because I promised to come back to that. That issue, right? Pickle doesn't know how to render your data size into YAML. Because there is no default way. Kubernetes reads it differently than Grafana, I think. So what we do here is we say, look, for my configuration for this template, I know what the format is. So I can actually define the output for this by saying that it's always rendered as YAML. If I just do this, and I now evaluate it without a format flag, it will still scream at me because now it has to render as YAML. And now we can do clever stuff. Like we're going to say, if you run into a data size anywhere, what you do is the unit that it... sorry? Into verses? Hang on. Let me clean this up first. Nope. I now hear what you're saying. Thank you very much. Sleep deprivation is a real thing. Luckily, you noticed that all that time I had squigglies telling me I was wrong, right? Honestly, it's good news. And so I can just take the unit it's in, and for example, drop the last character, because for some reason Kubernetes does not want to be at the end. And for some reason it needs to be capitalized. It's great to also have a live debugger in the audience. Ah, who saw that coming? Nice. And I believe you. And say for duration, I'm now just doing a theoretical, but say that we just always know that's always in seconds. In this format that we're rendering, it's always in seconds. Now I don't need to put a unit behind it, I just say, oh boy. Ta-da. So now we have our YAML. Hey. And with that, let's hop back to slides because I have 2 more minutes. We have website. More to the point, besides that website existing and it having your editor plugins, we have an LSP now. It doesn't yet have the type checker, but we're working on it. But at least it has limited autocomplete. It has syntax highlighting, that sort of stuff. It has a basic syntax check for you, which is already nice. The integration that you saw now is the IntelliJ or the JetBrains integration, so that works on any JetBrains IDE. LSP there and expanding. We have bindings so that you can consume stuff directly into Java, Go, Kotlin, Swift. More bindings in progress. Community have started bindings for other languages, which is great. And we have those packages that I promised you. So we also host on PickleLang package docs, we host the documentation. Feel free to click around, enjoy. This is all the stuff that we have built. We're working on having the proxy also scrape documentation for other packages. This should at least help find stuff, but as I said, you can publish anywhere, so even if you are in a domain that is not connected to the internet, you can host your own repository, no worries. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.